Welcome to What's Your Story podcast. I'm your host, Matt Story. On this pod, I sit down with people of color leaders to understand how they've been able to use their superpowers to make an impact on our world. And I do it one story at a time. My guest on the pod this week pulls from a wide range of experiences as a reporter, a newspaper columnist, communications director, and now an investor to make an impact on the world and more specifically, our cities. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about his story. So please welcome Lionel Foster to the show.
Matt, so good to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time and jumping on the mic. Before we get into learning more about your journey and all the great things you've been able to do, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about your background and maybe give us a story about what little Lionel may have been like.
So it's funny. I smile as soon as you say that because my mom, so early on when I was dating the woman who's now my wife, my mom described what she imagined as like four-year-old Lionel reading the Wall Street Journal, randomly grabbing words out of maybe a thesaurus or a dictionary and just practicing them. So that's the caricatured version. But I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, so East Coast, and I'm just really defined by the triumphs and the joys, as well as a lot of the struggles of lower income and working class, Black people in particular in Baltimore. They shaped me, they raised me, and there was a lot of fear there. But the person I am, the kind of commitments I have to equity and to broad shared prosperity come from that. So little Lionel was. Eventually grew to be this weedy 6 foot tall kid, just who lived mostly in his head, who would go, by the time I got to high school, shout out to Baltimore City College High School, founded in 1839. I think we're something like the third or fourth oldest public high school in America. Another institution that really shaped me. But I would ride an hour and a quarter on the bus, 2 buses from the west side of town, downtown, then uptown to east to get to high school. So yeah, people, especially a lot of Black folk, they've seen kids like me. I remember when I went to Johns Hopkins University, and a moment I'll never forget, Baltimore, like a lot of major American cities, is very racially segregated. And I was fortunate enough, I know I'm jumping ahead and you'll pull me back, but just to pull you into a really meaningful moment for me, I was at Mondawmin Mall. So I was living on the campus of Hopkins Homewood campus where I went to undergrad. And I was at Mondawmin Mall, which is in a predominantly Black part of town. I think at one point it was the single mall in America with the greatest amount of revenue coming in cash, which is just a really interesting statistic across from Frederick Douglass High School. So I had some business over near Mondawmin Mall, and I caught a cab back to campus. And there was an African-American guy. I guess he would have been maybe late 40s. And I told him, of course I had to tell him my destination. And I said, I'm going to the Homewood campus, Johns Hopkins University, University Parkway near 33rd. And he said, he said, Hopkins? You go? and so the founder of Johns Hopkins was a Quaker. So it's Johns with an S, which is a very unusual first name. People who are working or attend the institution, we know to pronounce the S, but some folks don't. It's almost like a nickname. You drop the S. So this guy, John Hopkins, we go on, and it was he just, Matt. It made me so happy because it's as if I was in the car with one of my uncles, right? He could not. The man could not be prouder if we were actually related, and that all he talked about the whole time was how much it meant to him to have someone like me at Hopkins, how he wished me well, and how that 15-minute ride made his day. So that's what little Lionel grew up with. There were real challenges. There were like actual dangers, But when you spend so much of your life surrounded by that kind of love, and you can tap into that with any number of people you happen to run in on the street under the right circumstances, like what can't you accomplish? Like if that's what you're being fed all the time, what can't you get done?
I love that story. And there is always that moment where you surprise someone, and when you surprise them, you pull them in and they see themselves in you. And so they are naturally proud. And it's like, oh my gosh, like he may have never seen another Black man that was going to Hopkins and in all the trips he had taken.
Right.
What did you want to be when you grew up, given all that love, that support, that feeling of anything is possible?
I cycled through a few things that's probably not unusual for kids. The first thing I ever remember wanting to be was a ninja. And no joke, around 4 or 5, like that was going to be the move because I thought that was cool. I would watch. I'll tell you a story about that. But the first thing was a ninja. Early on, I was very interested in finance. I would read. I would catch the bus. This was in middle school. I would catch the bus across town, and just to tap on this for a second, you have actual within a lot. I worked in a previous iteration of my career. I worked at a public policy research center called the Urban Institute for 7.5 years, and they do pretty fantastic work. I'm thinking, adult Lionel working in public policy is thinking back on kid Lionel, who as a 7th grader was also catching 2 buses to get to school because, I've heard it referred to as the geography of opportunity in America. The geography of opportunity in this country is incredibly fragmented. So here I was moving from a lower income area in East Baltimore, again, 7th grade. So I was maybe 12, 13, something like that. I would get off of one bus. Sometimes I would buy the Wall Street Journal because I would just hear things like I was a sponge and little things would stick. And I had some sense that there were people and institutions out there that knew how to take a certain amount of money and turn it into a lot more money. Like that's about as much as I knew, but I wanted to know more. So I would read like the business section of the paper, but the flip side of that were the sports pages. So there were other, bus travelers who thought, oh, what's going on with sports? They would ask me, about the box scores and things like that. And I was like, oh, no. And I would show them what I was reading. It's like, oh, okay. So absolute first thing I ever wanted to be, ninja. Early interest in finance. But the thing that defined me more than any of those things was my love of words. So I knew I wanted to become a writer at some point. And eventually that happened.
Well, one of the things we talked about before we got on the pod to record is you spent a year of your high school in Germany as part of a transfer program. And I'm just curious, what was that transition like, being an 80s kid coming from Baltimore, going to Germany? Yeah, so that was 1997 to 98. It was my senior year of high school. It was called the Congress Bundestag Scholarship. It was basically a joint venture. Now I use business lingo. Basically, more or less a joint venture between the German Congress, German Bundestag, which is the equivalent of our Congress, and the U.S. Congress, and they funded a number of students to spend a cultural exchange, a year in each respective country. So, as an American, of course, I went to Germany, spent my senior year of high school there. And, I'll tell you all about it, but I have to say, I think I was really well prepared for that because growing up in a very segregated part of Baltimore, but having gatekeepers with whom I negotiated and some of whom were just incredible boosters who many of the gatekeepers to academic and economic opportunity in my predominantly Black city were not Black. Some of them were, some of them weren't. And I was led into spaces that some of which were predominantly white. So that's something I had done most of my life. So you fast forward to my being 17, spending a year of high school in a foreign country,
it probably did not feel as foreign as many might suspect, because again, the geography of opportunity is very fragmented in this country. And many of us, including people like you, what I know of you, you have to become, certainly if you are to thrive in many instances, and sometimes just to survive, you have to become expert at surveying that treacherous terrain. So I'd done that in the U.S. I'd done that in my corner of the U.S. in Baltimore. So to hop on a plane and go to Germany, not as big a deal for me. But I was very much welcomed. I lived with the host family. So up until the age of 17, my big extracurricular activity was music. I played trumpet, but I was a very frustrated trumpet player. One of my heroes was Wynton Marsalis. I sounded nothing like Wynton Marsalis. And for those that don't know, Wynton Marsalis is from one of the modern first family of jazz, just jazz royalty. The Marsalis is from the New Orleans area. That's Bradford, Del Feo, Wynton. Their dad, Ellis Marsalis, was a very gifted pianist who died a few years ago during the COVID pandemic. But so band and trumpet was a lot of what I did. But I wanted to make a break from that. I felt like going to Germany was a way for me to do something different. So I took up basketball instead. Had never, and you can appreciate the irony of this. So here I was, 6 foot tall, I think reasonably athletic, in reasonably good shape. I like to play recreationally, but I was just not one of those kids who grew up with the ball in his hand. That was not me. But I said, that's going to be my new pursuit. That's going to be my passion. So you had to fill out an interest form before you flew over that introduced you and your passions to your new classmates and your host family. So I'm writing about how much I love to play basketball. I get over there. So the boys in my soon-to-be classroom, they think they're getting a young Michael Jordan, right? Yeah. They don't have, and it's not. I don't blame them, right? Because they're watching the NBA probably at like 11 p.m. whenever random games are played. This is pre, the Dish Network, pre a lot of stuff. Some of them still have VHS tapes. So all the information they have is the following: there's a kid from America who says he's passionate about Baltimore, who's coming to our class and he wants to play. He also happens to be black. I don't have access to a lot of black people. A lot of the black people I see in media, they really know how to do some things in athletic competition. It's on, baby. It is on. We're about to rip up this rec league. Y'all can't stop us. You're not ready. You are not ready. And I come over there. Instead, what happens is the first day, there's like a 5 foot tall female coaching assistant from Serbia who spends most of the time that first session teaching me how to make a layup. That's so. It belongs in some kind of sitcom. It's absolutely ridiculous, but I built a lot of character. It taught me how to get into shape. Some of the exercise habits I learned there, still inspire me today. I earned a spot on the team. So I made a lot of progress, but it was from a very low baseline. So it was a space for me to explore. And let me say a bit about that. I've been in this situation a number of times between, traveling abroad to go to graduate school. You enter these spaces and, whatever conception you had of yourself, for negative or for worse, or whatever you thought other people thought of you before you came over, well, that's some baggage that you don't have to pack with you if you don't want to, right? Mm-hmm. I could hardly think of a more opportune moment to give yourself permission to explore something different or to cultivate a neglected part of yourself than when you're transplanted to a totally different, geographic and physical environment. And I really felt that freedom. I felt it there. I felt it in grad school in the UK. And in Germany, I met a lot of people who welcomed me, who allowed me to, explore my identity on my own terms. And, some of them I'm still very, very fond of today.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned, the experience on the bus reading. the paper and people assuming you were looking at the sport. You're like, actually, no, I'm looking at business. Let me tell you what I'm reading. And then the opposite, saying you're interested in basketball, people assuming they're getting Jordan when they're not getting Michael Jeffrey Jordan. They may be getting another type of Jordan.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting you being able to find your lane and find your space. One of the other things we talked about is just you mentioned earlier, the power of gatekeepers, the power of mentorship, the power of someone that may open a door that either you didn't even know was there or you didn't know how to get to. And so one of the stories you told me is that you selected Johns Hopkins, but you actually were accepted into Stanford merely on the recommendation of a mentor. So could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think the power of just having sponsors, having mentors is just invaluable. That was a great example to me of what someone else can do on your behalf if they know your interest, they know where you're trying to go.
Again, it's my senior year of high school. I'm applying to colleges, but as you already heard, I'm in Germany. So I'm applying from Germany, and this is pre-mass adoption, mass consumer access to the internet. I didn't have an email address at this point, so I was sending faxes from across international borders, and the post and the postal service. One huge thing I had working in my favor was this is my recollection, and I'm pretty sure this is correct. It made such an impression on me. The lead guidance counselor at my high school back in Baltimore, last name Gibson, I believe his name was David Gibson. Mr. Gibson, he told me, used to handle admissions. I don't know if he was head of admissions or a part of the admissions team previously at the U.S. Naval Academy. My thinking is I'm putting pieces together. Okay, if he was a gatekeeper at the Naval Academy, that means he knows people, knows a lot of people who can open a lot of doors. And so I'm in Germany. We're going back and forth. He understands what some of my interests are. He tells me, and we zero in, because at this point, and you can see I have a lot of interest. At this point, I had an amazing physics teacher, junior year of high school. And I just love the idea of like discovery and exploration and like, what are the stories? And again, I have this writing instinct, and I think I process things with words, and I fell in love with the idea of the stories you could tell about the natural world, like through physics and what you could learn. So I had it in mind to, even though I ended up being a creative writing major, and that's probably more along the lines of what I should have been doing all along. At that point, I was thinking about physics. So we zeroed in on Johns Hopkins University, the University of Michigan, and maybe one or two other schools where we focused. And he informs me as sometime during that process, as we're having these conversations, it's like, look, Lionel, you're going to get a really nice letter from Stanford. I know that's not a school we discussed, but why the heck not? I spoke to a friend there. I know we've been working on these applications, but no need for you to put in an application. I just spoke to someone. Apparently, this is me filling in the blanks. That person was impressed with my story. I spoke to another admissions officer, and what they reflected back at me was, okay, you're an African-American male from the inner city who speaks fluent German, because several months into my exchange experience in Germany, I was fluent. Your SAT scores are incredibly competitive. I missed, back then, I forget what the scale is now, but I know the verbal section, a perfect score was 800. I missed 10 points on the verbal section, so 790, and was really competitive on the math section. But, I think some of the way I looked on paper was very competitive with a lot of other students. And then you add some of these other things like, okay, what kind of kid can go and succeed in a foreign country when he's never even been out of the country for an entire year? I wasn't part of that conversation, right? I wasn't, but he knew some things about me that left an impression on him. And also, it speaks to how much people trusted him, right? Because they never even saw me. I never stepped foot on campus, but I still have that letter.
Well, I love that because it is the best example of sponsorship. Someone talking about you when you're not in the room.
That's right.
Or even when you don't even know what's happening and they're able to speak on your behalf and represent you. Obviously, you had done the work and you had the amazing resume, but that person had no reason to even know who you were if not for Mr. Gibson. And I think as we progress through our career, not only having those people, but also being that person for someone is important because there's someone behind us that doesn't have that opportunity to know who to talk to and where to go.
One way I think about it is I think most of us we're the hero in our own story. And that's not necessarily narcissistic. I just think we're probably wired that way because the perspective you know best is your own, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think if you can present your story in such a way that makes other people amazing, pivotal contributors, where they might feel like a chapter or a beautiful vignette is not possible but for them, I think that's hugely compelling. I meet people all the time whom I want to help, whom I want to connect to other people. You and I were put in touch by someone who respects both of us and could just visualize. And that was a really interesting thing. This was Brian Wish of Arcbound.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just imagining Brian has some vision for, you know what? I know what Matt's really into. I know what Lionel's about. They don't know this yet, but they're supposed to talk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're supposed to help each other. I think that's such a tremendous faculty, one, to be able to appreciate some of the finer points of your story and welcome other people in, and maybe even momentarily make them more important to the narrative than you. And that thing that Brian did, he had this vision for what could happen if two people connected, and he was absolutely right.
100%. I think the other thing that's built into that is, one, you have to know your story first to be able to share it. And then once you share it with everyone, because you don't know, to your point, who has that idea and has that other puzzle piece that can connect directly into what you're doing, which is, again, it's very, very powerful. As we're wired as humans, we are wired to be social. We are wired to develop tribes and to come together and want to achieve things together. But we have to give people the story so they know how we connect. So there's a lot there. But I do want to jump into your professional journey and, mentioning that you started as a journalist. You spent the better part of 16 years on urban affairs, policy, communication. I'm curious, how did your unique experience growing up where you grew up, how did that enable you to be impactful in those roles?
Yeah, so much of my identity and my story, as I mentioned, goes back to growing up in certain blocks of Baltimore. And, Baltimore has so much to recommend it. There's so much beauty there. I go back and forth. I live in Washington, D.C., and I still do a lot of volunteering and play some leadership roles in Baltimore. And other people I know who spend more time in D.C. and a bit of time in Baltimore, a lot of what they say is it just feels like a real place. You feel that the people there are deeply invested, they care, and that the stakes are real for them. So Baltimore defined my sense of what, justice could look like and what economic equality could look like. And I just wanted to be relevant. I wanted to be relevant to closing some of the gaps that other people had helped me cross. And I knew I had to try and live my life in a way that would accomplish that. So that's what I knew at a pretty young age. Also knew I wanted to be a writer. So my career trajectory goes, I ended up at Johns Hopkins University. I studied creative writing. I'm surrounded by a lot of brilliant folks. And we talk about, I'll come back to this in a second. And one of the people I was surrounded by was a guy named Wes Moore, who some people will know as the current governor of Maryland. and the first African American governor of Maryland. And he was a classmate of mine. Like we knew Wes was going to do great things, but I mean, he was so humble. Like you hardly ever saw a combination of such high capability and humility. It's just you, like, he'd come back from this country or that country, or he'd do this with the football team. I don't believe he played football in any time before college. He just started on the college team. And so Wes and other people, and I had a really good academic advisor named John Bader, Dean Bader, I called him at the time. He was recruiting a lot of students to apply for these prestigious postgraduate awards, like the Rhodes Scholarship and the British Marshall Scholarship, Fulbright, the Luce, you name it. And he identified me as a student who might be competitive for the British Marshall Scholarship. So Dean Bader identified me, and then, but Wes was what really pushed it over the top. By this point, fast forward, it might have been my junior year. That sounds about right. By my junior year, Wes had already been selected as a Rhodes Scholar. And he took me to dinner and he said, "You need to apply for these awards." At this point, it was around this time, Wes was, I can't remember if it was the cover of People magazine. It might have been, People had this, like something like 50 most beautiful people. And Wes was one of them. And I can take you to the tree where he posed for his photo shoot on campus. So this was someone who was earning national and international recognition. He's also the author of the book called The Other Wes Moore, about another guy with his name, also from Maryland, also with ties to Baltimore, whose life trajectory went very differently. So this was I saw all these signals that the world cared immensely about Wes. And Wes said, "Lionel, like, you belong here. The kinds of things that Rhodes Scholars are doing, you belong here." So, we talk about mentors and inviting other people into your story. I've had these moments where, and this is something I'm still progressing through. I'm still growing, and I'm gonna grow through it by leaps and bounds. But I've had these moments where I didn't necessarily see that thing. I didn't necessarily think I was capable, but someone I trusted did, and that was enough for me. Mm-hmm. So Wes said, "You're one of us." I was like, "Okay, I'm cool. Deal. I'll do it." So I ended up winning the British Marshall Scholarship, which entitles me to study in the United Kingdom for a minimum of 2, what ultimately became 3 years for me. I study social policy and planning and urban planning, because my idea was, I've been trained as a writer. Another thing I want to write about is urban inequality and how to address it. So help me gain another lens. I do that. I come back and ended up working in the Baltimore City Department of Planning, among other places, the Urban Institute, as I mentioned earlier. So from 2005 until 2021, that was my domain: urban policy, what works in urban communities, including communities of color. How do we affect change there? While I'm at the Urban Institute, yet another mentor, Sarah Rosen-Wartell, president of the Urban Institute, she said, "Lionel, every time I hear you speak, you sound like an advocate." And she went to Yale Law and did a lot of great things after that. She said, "I think we both know of a place where they train pretty tremendous advocates. It's called law school. You should consider that." So I'm hearing this from Sarah Wartell. I'm hearing this from Freeman Hrabowski, who was at that point the long-serving president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Just grew at one point, due in part to Freeman's leadership. If you look, I'll get this stat roughly correctly. If you looked at all African-American undergraduates with a degree in biomedical engineering, look across the country, at one point, 1/4, 25%, came from UMBC.
Wow.
Under Freeman's leadership. He helped set an ethos and a dynamic that the way he explained it to me, he recognized that the sciences are difficult for all students. So how do you bring more humane teaching methods, a cohort learning model? How do you come up with state-of-the-art and humane teaching methods that welcome all students into these disciplines and use part of your resources to center the experience of students of color who have not always felt welcomed in these academic domains? And it looks like it worked really, really well. So I'm at the Urban Institute. Sarah Friedman was also on the board of the Urban Institute. And part of what I'm hearing is get a terminal degree. It can be a PhD, it can be a JD. So I do the JD at night while I'm working nearly full time. The Urban Institute gave me enough flexibility to do that. At Georgetown Law, so I get my JD from Georgetown Law. While I'm there, I find out that 1/3 of law school are the courses they make you take. 2/3 are electives. I made all of my electives about business and tax law because I found them incredibly exciting, and had a moment. I went into law school with an open mind. I was very much willing to become an attorney. It looked like if I became attorney, it would be in business law as a transactional attorney. I loved when the law became that practical and hands-on. I excelled at it in the coursework. I loved it. But I realized I think I love business even more than I like the law. Can I parlay my connections and my training, everything I have up to now, including in law school, into a job on the business side instead of simply serving business clients? And the answer was yes. And that is how I ended up in venture capital.
If that all wasn't enough, you founded the Baldwin Prize, which is a scholarship and essay competition for kids in from your specific high school. Why was it important for you to give back, knowing what we just ran through of all these people that poured into you? And how did you prioritize this, given everything you had going on?
In 2015, I received a letter from the Alumni Association at my high school inviting me to be inducted into their Hall of Fame. Their rationale was that in my previous life as an urban affairs journalist who was focused on issues of equity in Baltimore and similar communities, that they wanted me in the Alumni Hall of Fame. Previous inductees into the Hall of Fame include a number of Nobel Prize winners, at least one former governor of Maryland. I believe Dolby, who people know for the sound systems, the amazing sound systems. He went to my high school.
Oh, wow.
So you had some real luminaries. So I get this letter, and because there's just such, I just wish this for everyone. You enter, again, Baltimore City College High School. As a freshman, you enter, and we call it the Castle on the Hill because the current building, again, the school goes back to 1839. Our current building was built, I believe, in 1929, and it's a kind of neo-collegiate Gothic structure. It looks like a castle surrounded by, soccer fields and other play fields and sloping green expanses in Northeast Baltimore. It's gorgeous, and you come in between the building and pictures on the wall, you are immediately welcomed into the traditions. It's like, this is who has come before you. You're part of this now. Add a brick to this edifice. Mm-hmm. Like this is what you can accomplish at this place. For that community to say I conducted my career and just my life in such a way that they wanted me in that club, it meant a lot to me. I read the letter. I go tell my boss, my immediate boss at the Friend, Arlene Corbin Lewis, and I cried. I was just overwhelmed. And I also knew when I made my speech during my induction ceremony, a short statement, I didn't want it to be about me. I wanted it to be about what that institution taught me to do. City, for short, what we call it, another nickname, we just call it City. City was where I learned to become a writer. James Baldwin is one of my writing heroes. So what I did, I made my induction speech, and I cleared this with the school in advance, an announcement and a justification for the Baldwin Prize, a scholarship, an essay competition where students use the written word to learn more about themselves and how they want to show up in the world. I describe James Baldwin's brilliance as, it was such a radical and personal move. This was a gay black man who grew up in early and mid-century racially segregated America. He had the audacity to believe that what was true for him, if he could look honestly at his interior life and his emotional life, if he could stare all of that in the face, the pain, the rage, the joy, the love, if he could look at that and put it into words, it might save his life and it might help somebody else. That's the best way I can describe as what seemed to me to be Baldwin's mission. So it was my idea to introduce others, young people. If we involved with the Baldwin Prize could meet young people at a pivotal moment of their development and put that Baldwin ethos and that Baldwin process in front of them, like what might it do? What kind of citizens could this cultivate, and what kind of human beings could this help develop? So we've been going, first year was 2015, it's eight years in. We are part of the freshman English curriculum. Every student at the school for the past several years has had to write the Baldwin essay, and it's one of the best things I get to be associated with.
That's beautiful. And I just love the idea of like, it may be thought of as a competition or an assignment, but the fact that it's not about that product, it's about what they learn about themselves going through it and exposing them to that thinking so early. And so a part of when they're forming their identity and what have you is just really, really impactful. I'm curious, what would you say is your superpower?
I think, putting a lot of things into words, putting into words what I'm passionate about, crystallizing, like what are we really doing here? Like whatever we do, it could be going to something as mundane as going to the supermarket. It could be gathering at a place of worship. It could be, the way you show up at your job and what you're trying to achieve with your team. I think I'm good at stepping back and going, at least for me, and I hope this is true for you, I think this is why we're really here. I think this is what this is really about, and respecting the human stakes and helping people feel seen. I think, yeah, that's the big thing. This is what I've heard from some other folks. It's been so important for me in the complexity of my identity. It's been crucial to my thriving and my survival, like to really be seen by important people in my life. And I have to make sure other people are seen and feel loved and respected and admired in that way. That's what I'm here to do.
Well, I'm going to close out and hope we can have a little bit of fun. When they turn your life story into a movie, who would you want to play you on the big screen?
Once when I was asked this before, I said Kermit the Frog,
okay.
Which would be a lot of fun. I really don't know. You know what? I could think about it. I probably can't name the person, but like I look at I haven't watched the series, but I've seen advertisements for Winning Time, about the Showtime Lakers of the 80s.
Yeah.
Just the brother who plays Magic Johnson. I don't remember ever seeing him before, but he just jumps off the screen. So I would hope that, if I did something that was worthy of cinema or even, a prestige drama on peak TV, that they would find somebody who maybe it's an unknown. Because so often I've been an unknown who's been given a chance. And I would want this to do the same thing for somebody else. Could I just also mention a little bit about my day job and why I love it before we wrap? So I work at a firm called Camber Creek. It's a venture capital. I want more people of color to know that venture capital is a thing, because the nuts and bolts of venture capital is that you pull money from institutional investors and often high net worth individuals. This goes into funds, and you take your expertise in those funds and you find high growth potential companies and you help them grow. Between that funding and all the other resources you have, you remove obstacles, you strategize, and you help them grow. Camber Creek has been, our specialty is real estate technology, which is a thing. Tech is applied to any number of things in real estate. And, the thing I really want to say about Camber Creek is that sometimes I'm humble to a fault. It's something I'm working on. I know how hard I've worked. I know I belong. But just because you know you belong, sometimes if you don't look exactly like people who have come before in an industry, they might not let you in. I was introduced to Camber Creek. I looked nothing like, he studied what in undergrad? Creative writing, creative what? He's been working in what, like public policy for the past 7.5 years. So I look nothing like many other candidates that they've probably seen a million times. I never went to business school, but they cared more about capability and aptitude and drive. And they said, everything else we can teach you. We cannot teach you how to hold down a serious job and law school at the same time. We can't teach anybody that. But if you come to us with that same kind of mentality to make it happen, we can roll. And so I would, one thing, if I'm going to send this, once you air this, I'm going to send this to my nephew. I have a lot of young people in my life whom I really love. That's one thing I want to say explicitly to them. Be the kind of person who appreciates what people are capable of and do what you can to support it, and look for institutions to affiliate yourself with that care about kind of capability and drive and your potential and how true you will be to that potential, and not necessarily picking folks that look exactly like the model that seems to have worked for a lot of other people. I love that about my team, and I love that we work in an industry that's all about building big things. So
thank you for saying that, because that's probably more important than some of the more trivial questions I was gonna ask you. And I think ending on that note of inspiration, that note of what's possible, that note of, again, you want to be humble, but you want to be too humble. And you want to recognize the value you can bring to these organizations, even if you don't look like the typical candidate or the typical person in that role. I think just giving everybody that to wake up to, and to know you can go chase whatever it is, dream, goal, objective you have, if you keep that in mind. If people want to follow your story, they want to know more about where you're up to, where should I send them?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. Just type in my name, Lionel Foster, Camber Creek. I should come up pretty easily. Also, you can go to thebaldwinprize.org. So if that's too hard to remember, just Google Baldwin Prize and Lionel Foster, and that should come up. And between those two things, I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
Until next time, I encourage you, as always, to continue to share your story. It's so important, not only for you, but for others to hear your story. And if you have any feedback or any comments about any of the podcasts, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me at all of the social channels at Matt E. Story, or you can go to my website, www.mattestory.com.